everybody, we're back again with Flat Stanley and we're on Chapter 5, Arthur's Good Idea. For a while, Stanley Lambchop was a famous name. Everywhere that Stanley went, people stared and pointed at him. He could hear them whisper, "Over there, Agnes, over there. That must be Stanley Lambchop, the one who caught the sneak thieves," and things like that. But after a few weeks, the whispering and staring stopped. People had other things to think about. Stanley did not mind. Being famous had been fun, but enough was enough. Stanley strutting around town, everyone's recognizing him, his notoriety. And then came a further change, and it was not a pleasant one. People began to laugh and make fun of him as he passed by. "Hello, super skinny," they would shout, and even ruder things about the way he looked. Stanley told his parents how he felt. "It's the other kids I mostly mind," he said. "They don't like me anymore because I'm different. Flat." "Shame on them," Mrs. Lambchop said. "It is wrong to dislike people for their shapes, or their religion for that matter, or the color of their skin." "I know," Stanley said. "Only maybe it's impossible for everybody to like everybody." "Perhaps," said Mrs. Lambchop, "but they can try." Later that night, Arthur Lambchop was woken by the sound of crying. In the darkness, he crept across the room and knelt by Stanley's bed. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Go away," Stanley said. "Don't be mad at me," Arthur said. "You're still mad because I let you get tangled that day you were my kite, I guess." "Skip it, will you?" Stanley said. "I'm not mad. Go away." "Please, let's be friends." Arthur couldn't help crying a little too. "Oh, Stanley," he said, "please tell me what's wrong." Stanley waited for a long time before he spoke. "The thing is," he said, "I'm not just happy anymore. I'm tired of being flat. I want to be a regular shape again, like other people. But I'll have to go on being flat forever, and it makes me sick." "Oh, Stanley," Arthur said. He dried his tears on a corner of Stanley's sheet and could think of nothing more to say. "Don't talk about what I just said," Stanley told him. "I don't want the folks to worry. That would only make it worse." So here's his younger brother trying to comfort Stanley. "You're brave," Arthur said. "You really are." He took hold of Stanley's hand. The two brothers sat together in the darkness, being friends. They were both still sad, but each one felt a little better than he had before. And then, suddenly, he was not even trying to think. Arthur had an idea. He jumped up and turned on the light and ran to the big storage box where toys and things were kept. He began to rummage in the box. Stanley sat up in bed to watch. Arthur flung aside a football and some lead soldiers and airplane models and lots of wooden blocks, and then he said, "Aha! I have found what he wanted, an old bicycle pump." He held it up, and Stanley and he looked at each other. Now, what would they do with a bicycle pump? "Okay," Stanley said at last, "but take it easy." He put the end of the long pump hose in his mouth and clamped his lips tightly about it so that no air could escape. "I'll go slowly," Arthur said. "If it hurts or anything, wiggle your hands at me." He began to pump. At first, nothing happened except that Stanley's cheeks bulged a bit. Arthur watched his hand, but there was no wiggle signal, so he pumped on. And then, suddenly, Stanley's top half began to swell. Oh no! I'm not sure if this was the best idea the boys have had. "It's working! It's working!" shouted Arthur, pumping away. Stanley spread his arms so that the air could get around him, inside of him more easily. He got bigger and bigger. The buttons of his pajama top burst off. Pop, pop, pop! A moment more and he was all rounded out, head and body, arms and legs, but not his right foot. That foot stayed flat. Arthur stopped pumping. "It's like trying to do the very last bit of those long balloons," he said. "Maybe a little shake would help." Stanley shook his foot twice, and with a little whooshing sound, it swelled out to match the left one. There stood Stanley Lambchop, as he used to be, as if he had never been flat at all. "Thank you, Arthur," Stanley said. "Thank you very much." The brothers were shaking hands when Mr. Lambchop strode into the room with Mrs. Lambchop right behind him. "We heard you," said Mr. Lambchop. "Up and talking when you ought to be asleep, eh? Shame on—" "George!" said Mrs. Lambchop. "Stanley's round again." "You're right," said Mr. Lambchop, noticing. "Good for you, Stanley." "I'm the one who did it," Arthur said. "I blew him up." Everyone was terribly excited and happy, of course. Mrs. Lambchop made her hot chocolate to celebrate the occasion, and several toasts were drunk to Arthur for his cleverness. When the little party was over, Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop tucked the boys back into their beds and kissed them, and then they turned out the light. "Good night," they said. "Good night," said Stanley and Arthur. It had been a long and tiring day. Very soon, all the Lambchops were asleep. The end. Wow. That's actually a pretty short chapter book. So here's a sneak peek of the next one. Turn the page for a sneak peek at Flat Stanley, Stanley Flat Again by Jeff Brown. So I don't think he's going to stay round forever. I think he's going to go flat again. So here's a sneak peek at the next book. And the first chapter is called A Morning Surprise. So I'll give you a sneak peek at a picture. I don't think Stanley stays round. He goes back to being flat. So Flat Stanley is actually a pretty long, let's see if there's a picture of it, book series. No pictures. And so here was our story. The Original Adventure by Jeff Brown. I know the library where I live, just yesterday they started taking curbside pickup. So you can check to see if your libraries where you live are doing curbside pickup. You can request your book ahead of time, and then you just drive up and you pick it up and they bring it to your car. So hopefully you guys can do that too. Okay, so that was a fun book. So now you should by now have received, if not yesterday, then hopefully today, your Flat Hazel. And now you know what the flat part means. It's kind of silly. So you can take your little puppy around. And our puppy is asleep again. Take a look. There she is. She's asleep with all her toys. She's happy. It's kind of nice that puppies sleep so much. Okay, everybody. So if you have any requests of stories that I should read, maybe you can email me or you can send me a little note on Seesaw and I'll look into it, okay? All right, that was fun. See you guys next time. Bye.